A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. What is your creepiest true story? I was about 10 or 11 years old at the time. I woke up in the middle of the night to get a drink. As I come out of my bedroom, I pass my dad in the hallway. He is walking to the front door. I ask him what he's doing, but he doesn't say anything. Then I stand there and watch him walk out the front door. I go up the door after he closes it and look out the window. He's sitting, hunched over, on our sidewalk, under a large tree, just staring into nothing. I walked to my parents' room and woke my mom and asked her what Dad was doing. She woke up and said, "What do you mean? He's right here." She turned over and there was my dad, passed out in the bed next to her. Back in high school, I was on antidepressants. I was receiving help from my family doctor rather than a psychiatrist. There's generally a 1 to 2 week transition period where you have some undesirable side effects, usually nothing too major though. I was home alone taking a bath, trying to relax. I distinctly remember hearing a dark, eerie, ominous voice say, "Someone is here, better check your closet." I tried to forget about it, but I was close to having an anxiety attack at that point and got out, wrapped myself in a towel, and warily checked the linen closet right outside the bathroom. The voice comes back and says, "Wrong closet." So, I go check my bedroom closet, heart pounding and sweating at this point. After feeling a huge wave of relief that nothing was actually there, I hear the creepy voice emit this evil, demonic-like laugh fading off into the distance. Once I started seeing an actual psychiatrist, they took me off that med real ducking quick, because apparently it can cause hallucinations. I was working as a waitress at a bar in the city, and this guy got overserved and was being pretty rude. He had grabbed my arm and tried pulling me over to him, so we cut him off and sent him on his way. As I was locking up the patio maybe an hour later, he wanders up to the edge from the parking lot, seemingly sobered up a bit. I was smoking as I worked and he called over to me and asked to bum a cigarette. I was like, "Sure, I'm not a huge dick." I walked over and went to hand him one and he jumped up on the edge of the porch and grabbed my wrist and pulled me up to him. He looked into my eyes with this wild, weird look and says, "I will fucking find you and it will be soon." I flipped out and leveraged my foot against the railing to get out of his grasp and booked it inside. I sat at a nearby Waffle House until morning, paranoid he was going to try and follow me home or something. Probably just a drunk asshole trying to get his rocks off on scaring a teenage girl, but goddamn it worked. I was working in a convenience store, 19 years old, single mom. Luckily this day I wasn't alone. This guy came in, walked around and then went back to pump his gas. Then drove off without paying. I got the tag number, called the police per policy and didn't expect anything to come from it because that's what always happened. Gas theft just wasn't a priority to the police department. To my surprise, less than an hour later, an officer walks in and asks me to identify the guy, which I did. I really didn't think too much of it, just happy they caught the asshole. I went on about my business, went home, got on with life. The next day the manager calls me early, tells me that she saw the guy who I had identified on the news. He was wanted for 2 counts of murder. He had murdered a female jogger, no apparent motive, and a convenience store clerk that he had kidnapped after robbing her. I assumed she was mistaken because that just seemed too crazy, something I did helping catch a murderer just seemed unlikely. Later that day the officer came by and told me it was true and thanked me. Without the tag number they may not have caught him until he had hurt me women. She also told me that the reason that the police caught him quickly was the car was stolen. Then the officer told me the scariest part of all. Coming in and walking around the store is exactly the same thing he did before the robbery/kidnapping of the second woman he murdered. I will never know exactly why he didn't rob me, or worse, I assume it was because my manager was there, which was unusual. I'm just grateful for whatever it was. This was early 2003 or so and I'm in a small southern city, so it's doubtful it'll still be online, but I will check. This is my friend's story. She was sleeping in on Halloween morning. She was having a vivid dream that she was having an out-of-body experience. Floating above herself, she was trying everything to wake herself up. She was screaming, "We'll say Maggie, Maggie wake up. You have to wake up right now, you have to buy the kids Halloween candy." Getting up early, especially on a weekend morning, was extremely out of character for Maggie. She woke up in a panicked sweat, throws on some clothes and leaves in a hurry because for some reason, getting Halloween candy is super fucking important right now. Once she comes back home, she opens the door and is hit immediately by the strong scent of gas. Her roommate accidentally left the gas stove on and gas had filled the entire house. She believes, as do I, in some unconscious, last-ditch effort to save herself, she had this out-of-body dream to wake herself and leave the house immediately. Creepiest true story that I remember from when I was very young. We had a nice old neighbor, male, probably in his 70s or early 80s, that lived across the street from us and had a big beautiful black lab. His name was Lee, fake name, and her name was Booger and she was the nicest dog ever. Well, we used to see Lee out on his porch all the time or in his yard and we would always say hi and sometimes my dad would go and have some beers with him later in the evening. Really nice guy. Anyway, came this hot summer, I mean hot. 110 degrees for at least a month, in Michigan, that's ridiculous. We didn't see Lee out on his porch or the yard for a couple of days, but we figured he was probably staying inside with the AC being as he was an older fella. We went to visit my aunt for 3 days after that because she was awesome and had a pool lol. When we came back, my dad went to visit Lee and I just remember everyone being really upset. Not just, an old man died upset. My dad was puking in the grass when he came back. Even an hour later. He wouldn't talk about it, even to my mom. I know he gave a statement to the police and I remember seeing them taking Lee's dog away. I was crying because Booger was a nice dog and I wanted to keep her if Lee had died. I didn't understand what had happened at the time. It wasn't until I was older that my dad finally opened up to me about it. He was drunk when he did, he needed to get it off of his chest. He had never even told my mother, they were divorced by the time he told me. He said that he went in the house and the smell was horrible. Thick, almost oily, like you could feel it coating your mouth. He said that the first thing he noticed was the lights all being off and the flies. There were flies all over. Lee wasn't anywhere to be seen right off, so my dad looked around the house. He said that he got halfway into the hall and he heard a weird noise in the back bedroom. A repetitive noise. He said that he first thought that it was a clicking noise, but as he got closer it started to sound more wet. It didn't even occur to him that the dog would still be in the house. The hungry dog. He opened the door to the back bedroom and he said the stink hit him in the face like a ton of bricks. He almost passed out from the strength of the stench. He threw up right there in the doorway, before he even looked. Lee was in his bed, or what was left of him. His head and shoulders were intact, but he was decaying rapidly in the heat. From the chest down, Dad said he was missing most of his flesh. His gut was entirely gone. The dog still had her muzzle in him and was working on a hole in his legs. He said that the dog didn't even stop or notice him. He slammed the door and booked it home. Once in high school I was babysitting a teacher's kids with my ex and the parents were super late so we decided to stay in the living room, even though the TV and such was downstairs, so we could leave as soon as they got back. They lived in this huge house overlooking the woods and this little pond area so they had big windows installed throughout the home. At about 12:30 I started getting annoyed so I gave the parents a call and they said that they were on their way back. By this point, the huge windows were really starting to freak me out but whatever, I was with my boyfriend and the parents were on their way. A few minutes later, we heard the doorknob to the garage jiggle. We thought it was the parents letting themselves in at first but it continued to jiggle for about 20 seconds but then stopped. I started freaking out and walked towards the kitchen, where the door was, and glanced through the window that overlooked the deck. I'll never forget it. There was a strobe light of some on with a man standing in front of it, so he was silhouetted, and he was just standing there. I start panicking basically, and the light just stops blinking suddenly. My heart had pretty much stopped. I assumed he just left after that, but I called the parents and they were still 20 minutes out, so it couldn't have been them. When I told them about what happened, they informed me of their war vet neighbor who would apparently wander the property at night and may have viewed me as a threat for some reason. Why they didn't tell me that beforehand or tell him that we were going to be there, I'll never know. But hey, I got paid, though not enough to even go back to that house again. I was sitting downstairs minding my own business when my sister yells down for me to come upstairs. I argue back for her to come down and stop being lazy. This goes on for around 2 minutes and I am highly irritated. All of a sudden I go cold and realize my sister is in Japan for travel. But it was her exact voice. So at this point I am freaking out and I grab a knife and go upstairs, walk into my sister's room, and the rain on the window was dripping down except for one circle around the size of a plate, which the rain was not touching but drizzling around the edges. So very strange. I called my sister and she confirmed she was fine and had no idea what it was upstairs. I was at a party at my friend's house up near Whiskeytown. Her place was in the middle of nowhere, lots of acres, trees, fields, etc. I was out on the patio chatting with a few people. It was around 10 or 11, I believe. The next thing I know, I woke up in the middle of some field staring straight up at the stars on my back. I got up in a daze and looked around, not knowing how I got there. I finally could make out my friend's place in the distance, but it was quite a walk. I made my way back, calling out my friend's name, or anyone, but everyone was gone. Seemingly vanished. I went back inside still calling out, and my friend comes out of her room saying everyone left hours ago. I asked what time it was and it was around 4:35, as the sun was just starting to rise. I sat on her couch as she went back to bed. Then when it got brighter I drove home wondering WTF that was all about. I hadn't taken any drugs and barely drank, if at all, because everyone else was smashed drunk, so I was sort of taking care of people until I woke up in the field. I brought this up to her recently as she still lives there and she says she has seen strange lights in the sky at night, as well as other reports. I have never been able to put together what happened that night. Back when I was in high school, me and this kid didn't really get along. At all, he hated me. I went to sleep one night and woke up to a bunch of missed and outgoing calls to a number I didn't recognize. Apparently in the middle of the night in my sleep I somehow got this kid's number. And started calling him and texting incoherent shit to him in my sleep. I never once had his number in my phone or anything, and I didn't ask anyone for the number in my sleep, and I never figured out how I got it. It still bothers me. To reiterate, I contacted him in my sleep without his phone number and have no clue how it happened. My family bought a penthouse apt back when I was in HS. We got it for like $50K under what it was worth. Turned out the previous owner was a music producer who had disappeared. The guy's body finally wound up being found months later. The way I remember it, he had been tortured then shot multiple times. Real sad stuff. We bought the APT from his mom, who just wanted to be done with the whole thing. Anyway, my stepdad and I started going daily to fix it up, but I always felt uneasy about being there, as if someone was watching me. One day my stepdad went down to the car to get some tools and left me alone. As I was there by myself, I looked down the hallway that led down to the master bedroom, and I kid you not, I saw a bright white silhouette appear from one side of the master bedroom walking to the next. It stopped in the middle, turned and looked straight at me. I fucking froze. It wasn't like an evil kind of thing. He just looked at me for a few secs and then walked to the other side and disappeared. I freaked the fuck out and bolted for the elevator. This shit happened during the middle of the day. It was bright as can be, so I knew what the fuck I saw, but my stepdad wouldn't believe me and laughed it off. A couple days later, while we were tearing down some built-in shelves in one of the bedroom closets, we found a notebook belonging to the previous owner, and in it were love poems, lyrics, and sketches. My mom told my stepdad not to throw it away so we could give it to the guy's mom. My stepdad, being a piece of shit, threw it away. After that, creepy shit started happening. Lights turned on and off. Windows we had closed the previous day would now be open. These were hurricane-force windows, by the way, the kind that have latches and keys to them. So it was impossible for the wind to have opened them. My mom and I stopped helping with renovations after that, and my stepdad hired some guys he knew to come and finish. These guys lived pretty far away, so my stepdad told them to stay in the apt while the repairs were done. They lasted 2 days. They called my stepdad in a panic in the middle of the night, saying they heard shit, saw shadows, and that their alarm clock would go off at random times they hadn't set it to. My mom decided that was it and called in a priest to bless the house. We then burned sage all throughout for a couple of days with the windows open to cleanse and clear the apartment. The creepy thing stopped after that. A few years later, I ran into one of the guys and asked him what had happened in the app that spooked him, and he said doors were slamming in the middle of the night and they heard what sounded like things moving out in the laundry area. He said it was the scariest shit he'd ever been a part of and wanted nothing to do with it. Being from the Navajo Nation, I have seen a lot of crazy shit. Anyone not from here is most likely not to believe me. I have stories about skinwalkers, Kachina dolls coming to life, Bigfoot, werewolves, and some type of winged beast, but I think the most creepy is one of my skinwalker stories. It is a bit of a read, but here we go. So this story takes place in the early 2000s when I was a teenager. My cousin had just had a baby and her husband was called out for a job that would take a couple of weeks. My cousin asked if I would stay with her for the 2 weeks to help her with the baby/work around the house. I was there for a few days and everything was pretty uneventful, until the middle of the second week. At night we would hear someone knocking on different sides of the trailer. Keep in mind the nearest neighbor was about 5 miles away. This continued for 3 nights in a row. The 4th night is when things take a turn for the worst. The night starts with the knocking, but it progresses to scratching. Worried that someone was trying to break in, I summoned the courage to go outside and confront whatever/whoever was messing with us. I only caught a shadow of whatever it was as it ran behind the trailer. I ran around yelling at it, "You better run because I'm going to call the cops," or something to that extent. It is so fast I could not believe it. As I chase it to the front of the trailer, it runs through the clothesline. This is where it gets even crazier. It ran towards the utility post and climbs up it, clutching something in its hands, and begins the most airy laugh I have ever heard. It jumps back down, dropping whatever it was holding, and runs toward the window of the trailer, as if to peek in. My cousin was inside holding the baby. I run to the window and look, and to my amazement it had disappeared. I run inside and tell my cousin it is gone. Needless to say, we didn't sleep well for the rest of the night. The next morning I go outside and look at the window where I had last seen it. I look at the ground and see bare footprints, however these were no ordinary footprints. The best way I can describe it was a human footprint with claws, like a dog or wolf. I go to the utility pole and found what it had been clutching the night before. It was my niece's tiny little shirt. It goes without saying we spent the next few days in the safety of my mother's home off the res. TLDR, Skinwalker harasses my cousin and I all night. My cousin's stepfather was an abusive drunk who ruined the lives of everyone who knew him. He was diagnosed with cancer, and spent the last 6 months of his life withering away. The last 2 weeks of his life, he was so sick and weak, he was completely bedridden and couldn't speak at all. In his last few minutes of life, after having not spoken for weeks, he suddenly began flailing and screaming, "It burns, it burns, oh God, the fire, it burns." Then he died. As my cousin explains it, they were witnessing him going to hell. Literally. I was at home alone playing video games when I heard a thump upstairs, so I went to see if anything fell over, and nothing had. I checked the roof and attic for raccoons, nothing. Soon after, something tapped on my bedroom window, which was 30+ feet up with no plants outside. Later, I got in the shower and heard footsteps in the hallway and the bathroom light went out. So I jumped out of the shower, grabbed my machete from my room, and searched the house. Again, nothing. All the doors and windows were still locked. Later, I went to bed. I woke up later to a cool breeze and saw an apparition with a distinct face drift out of the corner of my room, over the foot of my bed, and out the door. I described it to my dad and he said he saw the same apparition. The strange noises went on for weeks. I have never believed in the paranormal, but these experiences made me question that. Late to the party but had a small apt with my boyfriend that had minor things happen. Lights flicker, doors creak and open a bit. We chalked it up to an old apt building. Then one night we had a couple of friends over. They decided to spend the night after it got late. They were sleeping in the living room while I was in my bedroom with my boyfriend. I heard what sounded like someone running into my kitchen chair and stumbling into the next room. I got up thinking a guest had tripped only to find one of them sleeping and the other just getting up to ask if I was okay. We turned on the light to find a single chair halfway across the room in the kitchen. No one had a clue how it got there.